waters itself until it's done. I have tomato trees or tomato plants that grow like that. I used to do them all the time on my patio, and it's quite amazing. I never thought the amount, like they say 100 times more, and you see it on paper, but you don't believe them until you see a tomato plant just give you hundreds and hundreds of tomatoes. Like, I could never eat this many. And the methodologies are incredible. People today can just, for $20, walk into a home supply store, like Home Depot or Lowe's, one of those places, and they'll have everything you need to have a tiny little hydroponic garden going, and the production is unfathomable.
Can you discuss a few minutes the dangers of genetically modified foods?
Well, I mean, and that's a two-edged sword. There are indeed some dangers, but there are also benefits. So it's a strange situation. You have the danger of, what's really happening is, well, the smaller danger, I suppose, would be what's really happening to your body as you process it. The larger danger is most of these genetically modified crops are being modified to have kill switches in them. They're then spreading out into real strains of plants. So, for example, the Monsanto soybean is designed so that its soybeans will not sprout new plants. So when that crossbreeds into natural soybeans, now you have natural soybeans all slowly starting to die out. And that's an incredibly, incredibly bad thing. You can have just destruction of entire ecosystems through things like that, especially in places where the entire ecosystem is a monoculture. If that were to happen, widespread in Kansas, you would turn Kansas into a giant dust bowl. And so there are those dangers. However, on the flip side, there are the benefits. The CDC and a joint study said that 1 billion people in the world would be dead right now if it wasn't for genetically modified wheat. That one crop alone is basically keeping the third world alive through our food subsidies. We couldn't produce enough food to keep Africa going without them. So it's a two-edged sword. Well, they definitely need to stop genetically engineering plants to kill themselves. It's hard to turn your back on that other billion.
How much time has this hydroponic technology been around?
It's thousands of years.
Yeah,
when I was reading on it, I realized it was. I'm gonna say I'll put that on the Google group, and it's real informative. And it was the Aztecs even before that. It was in use it's been in use for a long time. It's not new. I thought it was like new.
Yeah. Well, the more primitive methods have been in use for a long time. The Aztecs and the Romans started it, and from there they basically started using a very passive method where they would just channel water either underground or they'd have stone-built containers. So things we do nowadays are much, much more beneficial. There, it was a cost for loss kind of thing. Like it cost them too much to set it up for how much more it would yield. Whereas here, when you're actively adding oxygen to the system, that's the whole key. Is by pumping these things through these pumps, you're actively adding oxygen into the roots. When you're growing a plant, there's 4 things that matter: how much sunlight it's getting, how much CO2 it absorbs through its leaves, how much nutrients it gets through its roots, and how much oxygen it gets through its roots. Most people forget that last one. And because of that, all of a sudden you have, instead of things growing twice as fast, you have them growing 10 times as fast.
So could you have in your house, let's say a fish tank with an oxygen pump,
Mm-hmm.
the regular for fish,
Yeah.
and then just go on? Could you
Yeah, in theory, you could just take off that light lid and then replace it with a different lid, and it would work. You'd have to be careful since you have the fish and the roots in the same container. You might want 2 with a pump running between the 2 of them, circular pump, so that it's going into one and then being recycled on a flush valve. I think I had yeah. You see, when they have these valves here, anytime the water level drops, it would then recycle into the fish, and then backwards again. So that way the water levels stay proper, but the fish don't get into the growing.
And one of the ways this is truly a closed system is that you can grow the fish food in the hydroponic.
They not only can you grow food specifically for them, a lot of fish, especially tilapia, who are very adaptive, can eat lots of the excess green matter from the plants. So not only are the plants filtering their water, and not only are they fertilizing the plants, they're also eating the plants they just grew. So it's quite convenient to have that little system going on there.
So it's what type of fish? River fish?
You need the more adaptive the fish, the better. Some fish need a very, very specific environment. If the pH is above 5.4, it's bad, or if it's too salty, it's bad. Fish are a very finicky bunch, but tilapia, which is the most commercially produced fish, it's the fish they'll use in fish sticks and things like that. Tilapia is incredibly adaptive.
Is that a freshwater fish then? Or?
Well, it's either. That's the awesome thing about tilapia. It can be fresh or saltwater.
Because one of my questions that I had was, could you use seawater?
You could, but it would modify what you can grow. Certain things can grow in high saline water, like salt water. Other things can't, whereas the tilapia can work in either. So conveniently enough, if you can have both set up with the same fish, and then you can have both saltwater crops and freshwater crops. The freshwater are more numerous, but there are still, those preferred tastes, those things that require the higher saline.
Because I think that the ocean water has a great deal of minerals and
Indeed, and it's already filled with microbes to begin with. Like it's already has bioculture. So there's a lot of benefit in that for closed systems near coastlines like we are here.
So you would never have to feed the fish, because they would just be...
Well, the fish would be fed from the plants. In theory, you might want some form of like protein supplement. The way they feed fish normally is like protein flakes. The way they see fish fed, it's more of a commercialized version of that. And so you may indeed.
I think your time's up.
Now you're
No,
wrong.
it's probably just messing up. Don't worry about it.
Technology here.
But yeah, in general, it's closed. However, to have any healthy creature that need protein, and you can't get that in most greens, you get alfalfa sprouts and things like that. So you could, in theory, specifically grow crops to keep it completely closed, as Frank was pointing out earlier. And many people do that right now. Like in Sweden, it's a very popular new thing to run these aquacultures, and they're trying to make them very, very self-contained there.
What about the fish in this system? Besides the fact that they're finicky and they need, particular environments, is that hard to maintain? Is that
For some fish, it certainly is, which is why they, in general, across all commercial production, this and traditional, they grow tilapia in general because they're so much easier. Salmon is doable, but beyond that, you start getting the weird things like they don't commercially grow catfish too often, things like that, because they require certain requirements. The tilapia are actually very easy to adapt, and this is actually one of the healthiest ways they can live, sadly enough, because the other ways that they're being farmed are much more horrible for them, and it actually ends up building up mercury poisons and things like that. And we've all been terrified about mercury in the fish.
And in these small isolated populations and in cases like that, is that healthier for them? Is there more of a problem with disease in that
Well,
case?
if you kept the population isolated like that, you could have an issue with biodiversity. However, normally when they have the environmental managers, the people who run the overall balance of things like this, they'll have them go out of their way to import fresh specimen to change the gene pool. With fish, it's really easy because of spawning. You have, say, 10 new males, and all of a sudden your gene pool has split. It's doubled.
Okay.
So fish is a much easier place to control problems like that. But yeah, in the early 60s, when they first started experimenting with this, NASA and other organizations, they were having problems with that. The fish would succumb to disease because they didn't bring in new genetics. I mean, they knew nothing about genetics in the 60s. It was brand new.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But you probably need more space if you're going to be doing the aquaponics, right?
The aquaponics requires more space because you need to keep space for the...
And the tilapia, how big they're pretty?
Well, a tilapia will grow and grow in general to the size of its container. So you could, in theory, have big tilapia. But commercially, tilapia are harvested between 6 pounds wet, which dries them out like when they're dead, and gilleted, it's down to like a pound or two of meat. But they're normally harvested about there. So in these ones, this one in particular, this footprint is 5 acres. It's about what you normally have for a skyscraper of that size. And then it produces for 150,000 people. So you only need, 6 of these, and you're pretty set for 1 million people.
Wow.
And that's the incredible thing, is just the amount of land that we can reclaim and just turn back to nature if need be. It's like, here you go. I mean, think about what was Kansas before it was corn. It was beautiful, it was majestic. Now it's corn. You could let it go back.
Yeah.
What about these designs in the context of the Venus Project and the circular cities?
Well, in the circular cities, I've seen many of Jacques' designs. He incorporates them into the outer ring of the circle. So if you were to envision a large circle, the outermost ring is the agricultural belt. And it makes the most sense because, one, it acts as a buffer between you and nature in case anything is to happen. And two, it keeps it out of the living areas. Most people will never have to go there. Robots will handle it and they'll ship it all into you via the pneumatic tubes, or even old conveyor belts would work in theory, but I like how the tubes. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different designs. The one that always reminded me of the circle cities was this geodesic one. I was like, how circular! I love it. It's all circles. But I mean, a lot of these designs are very, very efficient. Some of them, The square designs are more efficient within the context of modern land buying because you buy in squares. However, in theory, this is a much more efficient design to have it circular. So you see the large spacing between the levels there, that would be capable of supporting large trees, as they show in some of these other ones.
So in order to do the larger trees, you just need some kind of support for the tree, right?
Yeah, you just need like those little stones I was showing you. Now, that's the beautiful thing about trees, though, is, well, besides the fact that they can hold themselves in most aggregates, it's that beyond, it'd normally be hard to put a tree in a skyscraper. Let's be realistic, they weigh a lot. But because you're putting the dirt, which is half the total weight, the dirt they stand in, as Hydroponic instead, you've lowered the weight of the dirt by 1/3. It's only 2/3 the total weight. So it becomes more feasible to stack them up. You see how they have trees on the top level there, and trees coming out everywhere here, on little outcroppings. It becomes a feasibility. When I used to live in Vancouver, there was a single large tree at the top of a skyscraper. And it always freaked me out. I was like, how did they do that? It's a 70-foot tall tree at the top of a 70-story skyscraper. And now I see how they do it. It's not actually, it's a trick, but it's not impossible. A steel girder can support vertically, I think it's 30,000 pounds of weight, each girder. So you're talking about massive sums of support in that.
When you do it like this, what would be, like let's say if you're doing an orange tree, do you need the same amount of root space?
No, you actually need much less, which is one of the benefits. They hint to it, they don't specifically explain, but you see here the spacing. Normally in a grove, you space things about 25 feet apart to give you space for the trees to grow and what have you, whereas here you can put them much denser because you don't have to worry about their roots competing for resources because the roots are completely sponsored by the aerated nutrient solution no matter where they choose to grow. Very commonly in these kinds of things, let's say this was my large tank, if the new water source was coming in from here, the aerated water, you very commonly see all the roots start to grow this way. And so they'll all just grow around each other in an attempt to get to the most fertile spot in there. It's very interesting how they'll all intertwine and become one. And when one tree dies, let's say one tree dies for some reason, the tree is removed and the roots remain, and the roots are simply absorbed by the other roots. And they take them as a fertilizer. But yeah, here you have about 10-foot spacing is what I've seen most people talking about between the trees as opposed to 25 in the grove, which is useful.
I figure the buildings are not totally closed buildings to permit the exchange of
Exactly. They want to choose the way that they get the oxygen, so they bring it in, but then they add to it. That's one of the very interesting things about these. That one of these is built near one of those new carbon sequestering power plants. You can then pump the carbon into there with the new oxygen. That way they then absorb all the carbon. Plants use a lot of CO2 to grow. So atmospheric CO2 is 350 parts per million. In a closed system like this where you're controlling the input of oxygen and CO2, optimal is about 1,200, 4 times atmospheric conditions. And that's how you get some of these insane, some of those insane tree plants.
Backspace.
Some of these monstrosities. Yeah, those type of things are produced by CO2. Those are produced by CO2 doping, they call it. But the production is unbelievable. Most people think that plants grow from what they get from the dirt and from the water. That's a very, very small part of it. It's like us. We use water. We don't grow from the water. They grow from the CO2 they capture from the oxygen. A plant is made up of about 98% captured CO2. So by revving that up and oxygenating the roots, you have them set to turbocharge, basically, if you think about a car.
Do people that work in there have to wear masks or carry air or anything?
No, at 1,200 parts per million CO2, it's pretty safe to walk around. At about 1,800, it starts getting a little lightheaded and funny. So they suggest not going over that in these commercial type buildings. I wanted the same thing myself. I was like, am I going to pass out of that? No way.
Well, with all that plant life in there, there's probably more oxygen available than in a normal room.
Yeah, well, that's the really interesting part about it. Is not only is it hyper CO2, it's also hyper oxygenated. So whereas normal atmospheric oxygen is about 8%, in these rooms you can get 16, 17, and it's, yay, oxygen. You know that smile you get when you have a good oxygen rush.
like a hyperbaric chamber,
Yeah, it's amazing when you can control your own environment. You can, so long as you understand the way the plants are working, you can dictate what the atmosphere will be like by giving them what they need to produce you what you want. And then you end up with a perfect balance where they get what they want, and you get what you need. And I like it. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it.